Welcome to our new segment today. We are starting season number 6 around learning things about Power BI. So this session, Steve has done with a one session in the past. I think we did a very detailed diagnosis around star models, building star diagrams inside Power BI, how that works and how you build your stuff. Today, Steve and I, we're probably going to partner a bit on this session a little bit here as well, but we're going to talk through the report design framework. So hello, Steve. Welcome. Let's jump into it.
Yeah, awesome. Good to be back. For those who haven't seen the model design session, definitely check that out on Power BI Tips. This one we're going to go through and we'll explain it, but now definitely focusing on how to do really nice looking and crisp reports. So as we kick off, we'll get straight into it. Just to introduce myself, I work a lot with Mike and Power BI Tips. My name's Steve Campbell, if you don't know me. So I've just started my company, Sunny BI. So I'm the owner and run that. It's a consulting firm, right? We do data monetization, consulting services, that kind of stuff, focusing on Microsoft and especially reporting projects. And I'm Power BI and Excel trainer as well. So I do lots of stuff around training. We do have some courses, stuff like that. Part of what I want to do, though, is to try and open this up. And we want to make as much free content out there as possible. And we believe as in Power BI Tips supports us a lot and sharing as much as we can. And that's what today is. We're going to have another session, another 3-hour, 3-part session of really diving into the visuals and the design process. It's going to be very framework heavy, this one, and a really good way for people to help lay out and for you to kind of go from A to Z in terms of getting a report going and looking to see the visuals out on a page. Bit of about me. I lived in UK, Australia, and USA. I actually lived in Wisconsin, very close to Mike, and that's how we know each other. I'm back in the UK now, though, so I'm in London at the moment, and I also lived in Melbourne for a bit. So a bit of fun fact to get to know me before we get started. This is my website as well, sunnybitraining.com. A lot of the stuff will be available in my Learn Power BI masterclass. It is a paid course. So if you want to take kind of the full thing, definitely go there. Everything today, though, we're going to try and get a lot for free. And we're going to take at least the basics of this framework and what we're talking about. Okay, so let's introduce the session and kind of tell you what this is all about. So as we mentioned before, this is going to be a very design heavy, visual kind of focused session. It's not necessarily going to be tips and tricks on ways to visualize data, although we will cover a bit of that. Essentially, these 3 sessions are going to cover this design framework. And the design framework, here it is. This is my design framework. So as I said, I run my own consulting firm. Previous to that, I ran the data analytics team for Cognizant Microsoft Business Group in the EMEA region, doing again Microsoft BI. Prior to that, I was in another consultancy firm specializing again in Microsoft and BI. So my background definitely, of course, lots of BI, lots of reporting, a lot of consulting in the last 3 positions I was at. From that, these are my actual tools and my framework that I've built. This one is, I would say, not a simplified version, but a nice kind of cut down and easy to understand version. This is what I will go through when I design each port and my steps to creating it. We went through before, of course, the model design process in the previous session. So we're not going to be talking about DAX and we're not going to be talking about designing data models, that sort of stuff. This is going to be a lot of theoretical and frameworks, but it's really a path and a journey from getting from your initial sessions, from your kickoff sessions with your end users, right down into designing those reports and making sure they look really, really nice. It's kind of that way of making sure you have these beautiful reports. Everything's following a nice framework, though. So we're not just randomly putting stuff on pages without much thought behind it. So to introduce this, let's go through. We'll start here in the top left. And the first thing we're going to do and this is what we're going to talk a lot about today, is we design this design flow map. Very simply, this really is what I would call the requirements gathering step. So a lot of this, and we'll look at how we do this today, is we're going to gather the requirements for the report. Now, if you follow me on LinkedIn, we'll put my LinkedIn in the chat, but I talk a lot about this. And this has all come, as I said, from my work in BI and my experience. A lot of times when I see reports fail, and what I mean by reporting fail is reports don't get used, they're not correct, people don't like them, and you don't get much uptake. A lot of that comes from requirements gathering, and you're not answering the correct questions that people want to see. It's a very difficult thing to do, something that no one, I think, ever really does very correctly and right. And it's something you can continuously work on. So getting those requirements, really understanding what the end user wants, what they want to see. And essentially, this is a way of grouping them and deciding what you actually want to put in your report. Who's going to be viewing a report? What are the key things that they want to see?
Steve, I'll jump in here real quick here on this design flow map. I really like this concept of the design flow map. If you think about this, this really alludes to like, what is the user journey through my data? You know, what do I start with? Do I care about KPIs? Do I care about the audience? I mean, this is a lot around designing. What do you expect people to show up to your report and do? Where do they get help or not in your report? And then how do they navigate between the different pages? Because the Power BI desktop application is very powerful and can provide strong navigation across pages in a report and even between reports if need be. So having a story like this really helps articulate what is the need, and this really informs a lot of everything else that you need from a user story or data journey as you're trying to discover and walk away with actionable things, which I think we're going to talk more about that later.
Definitely. And I think that's a really good point to highlight. A lot of this is simply mapping things out, right? Just by going through, and I like to keep, you'll see a lot of these processes. Sometimes in the bigger projects, they get very complex. I always try and keep things as simple as possible, right? This is a great view. This is my output.
Yep.
You know, visual design, less is often more. Keep these processes simple as you can, but with getting all the information that you require. And just having a process, having a framework really helps guide you through and make sure you don't forget any of those questions and make sure you're answering the correct questions.
Agreed. Awesome.
Right. So once we've got that initial layout, the design flow map, typically then the next step is to start thinking about the pages. And this is when we're going to start looking at the individual pages. So in the design flow map, we kind of map out the high levels, the blueprint, if you like, of what the report will contain. Now we can start designing stuff. And we'll look through this in detail, most likely kind of tomorrow's session. Look at how we put visuals on a page, right? There's some science behind it as well. A bit of an art and a bit of a science, but we want to have some logical flow. We know where users look at things, and this takes into account a lot of design principles such as UI, UX. I'm taking a lot from web design, all this sort of stuff on how we naturally look and look through a page. This will help tell a story and communicate to the correct audience, the correct message, which is really important. Next is we're going to start then designing the individual visuals. We'll look at some hints and tips for this, but we'll go through these couple of questions, and we should always have some actions and some questions that our visuals are answering. So we'll talk a lot about this. Again, though, you'll notice up to this stage, it's all very word and high-level based, right? A lot of what we're doing here is outside of Power BI Desktop. It's quite easy sometimes to get excited and say, yeah, someone's asked me to do a new report. Let's dive in and just start creating a report in Power BI. However, if you want a really well thought through and well-designed report, there's a lot of these steps that we do before that, a lot without even starting designing visuals, to make sure we're conveying the correct information and make sure it's laid out in a nice and easy to digest way. Then we're going to go through things like high-level designs and scrims. So this will also be a big one on tools, on different functionalities and different things we'll be using. This is where we're going to look at tools such as Figma and the theme generator and actually start designing some of our interesting and fun-looking reports. And that bit's that's going to be day 3. That's going to be the last session next Wednesday if you're watching live, or session number 3 if you're watching on demand. This is when we're actually going to start seeing things look really nice. We'll look at a lot about reusability, how to make sure everything we're designing we can reuse in future. Doesn't have to be design everything from scratch. And that's a really strong point to make these beautiful designs. Takes a lot of time sometimes to set them up, but once you have them, we can start reusing and just editing certain components and reusable parts. All right, so the first section of that, the design flow map. Again, this is going to be laying out that map that really tells you how the pages are laid out, how they flow, and where we're going to go from each page. Before we start doing that, before we get into doing this, putting out these little maps, the first step is requirements. Now, to be honest, we probably could have made about 9 sessions just on requirement gathering. It's a very big topic, and there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of tips and tricks. What our goal is here is just to introduce it and kind of give you the basic elements of it and things that you really need to do, the main functionality and the main bits that you need to ask and the important questions you need to take. So the first thing we want to talk about when we're talking about gathering requirements is what Microsoft love to call, and we love to call, the audience. Now, I used to have my own audiences that I would create, think of these as personas almost. However, these are now I've aligned to Microsoft's way of thinking. So everything in here, I've tried to align to official Microsoft documentation as much as possible. It makes it a lot easier. And this makes it a lot more portable so that what you're doing is backed up by the official Microsoft documentation and these terminology and these words align. So the first thing that we want to ask ourselves when we're having this report, obviously the requests will come in maybe from different areas. Maybe it's your boss asking you. If you're like myself, right, I'm a consultant and I've gone on a call for the first time with a company, don't know what they want. But typically someone's going to come to you and say, hey, we need a report. They often won't think about these things. They won't understand kind of all the steps. They just say, hey, we want this report of this data here, showing this. A lot of times your end users will try and skip to the end and say, we want this report here. You should make this graph and kind of start with that. One of the hardest things is really backtracking them, right? And starting the base. And we'll look at some cool tools and tricks to do that. For the first question I always want answered is the audience. Who is going to be viewing this report? 3 audiences, and we'll break them down later. Essentially the executive, the analyst, and the information worker. To understand what these are. So executive, I know this is a very wordy slide, so I'll just kind of talk over. I'm not going to go through every word. I'm not going to read it out. This is available down this link. It's just from the Microsoft Learn page, which is why it's so wordy. High level though, executive, right? Imagine CEOs, C-suite directors, these type of people. They are making business decisions, business strategy decisions, those sort of questions. These are the sort of things that they want. Analyst is, as you guessed, a data analyst, something like that. They often have less of the high level kind of business strategic direction questions, but they could be more focused questions, answering specific questions. Analysts are also the ones that are just finding insights, for example. They don't necessarily looking at specific questions to answer, but they might just be looking at data trying to analyze it, right? They're analysts, surprisingly, and try and find insights, try and find ways to make improvements. Information worker. Again, this is someone, as it says here, help make decisions or take actions. Great. I really like their example they're using, inventory manager, right? Often they're looking at specific things, generally managers of departments, or this one says stock levels. I think of this, people running factory lines. You're looking at specific processes, or you're looking at specific departments, and you want data and information about that process or department. So, and we'll summarize this, don't worry. But once we talk about the audience, one thing that I find often about the audience is that, if we just go back here, people will often, when they ask for a report, try and have multiple audiences in the same report. They'll say, really, really common, right? We have this first page, which is where the executives will look. And then we'll also have a page, which breaks it down. And maybe this section of a page will have the high level KPIs. This section will have detail, and they mix audiences. One thing we want to do is really separate. And once we do best practices, if you've watched the modeling and the rest of the videos, we can separate data sets out to reports. So we can make multiple reports of the same data set. So I always say, if we have let's make an executive report, right? Let's make an analyst report with apps and sharing and audiences. It's very easy to have multiple reports, to have multiple views of the same info. Let's separate them and not try and get our reports muddled.
I'll agree with this statement a lot. And I find this to be very, very common. We try to do too much with too many things. Yeah. And I think really when you narrow down your focus a little bit and you really identify an appropriate audience for your kind of report, you'll see that the report build process goes faster because you're less worried about building everything all at once. And you can really, even from as you get more mature in building your reports, there's this idea of being able to take revisions in smaller amounts. So by breaking these audiences into distinct groups and making a report or a type of report that is designed for each audience, you could have, instead of having one person work on one report for all of these audiences, you can actually have 3 people work on 3 different reports and actually divide your workload more evenly across the team potentially. And you can pick up different files and projects to help move this through faster in development.
Yeah, and we'll also on day 3 look at themes and layouts and stuff, and how we can really make this super easy as well and have multiple people go really, really fast, which is one of the great things. I think what you said as well, narrow down your focus, that's a really key point.
Agreed.
I always do the analogy of, if you're learning, you've got a textbook and I'm studying for an exam. I don't get a highlighter and just highlight every line. Right? You highlight the specific information.
Yes.
Trying to put everything doesn't highlight anything at the end of the day.
Very true.
All right. So next, again, I've aligned this to Microsoft's way of thinking, but we kind of think of this report style. To be honest, this normally always matches up to the audience you've picked. So I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time. But again, Microsoft's definitions, wordy slide here, but this is straight from Microsoft, which is why I've kept it as is. Dashboard is probably that executive view. Executives want to see very focused insights. This reminds me of one of my favorite anecdotes of talking to an executive, and basically they told me their ideal report would be one visual. It would be a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Thumbs up means great, they don't have to do anything. Thumbs down means something off. They would ask, say, someone, hey, go check this. And that's it, right? So it's simple as better. They really want this insights. They don't care if everything's, good. Obviously, if you're tracking sales, you do care if it's up, right? But a lot of times you want highlighted information. So really, really simple dashboard. And that's kind of what a dashboard is, right? And how report dashboards got their name. So modeled off car dashboards. If I have a dashboard on a car, my check engine light comes on. I don't know what's wrong with my engine. I know there's something wrong. I'll take it to the garage and they will then do a report and drill down. Someone else will go have a look at it. But me, I just need to know important information. Something's happening. I don't necessarily need to know all the details. Analytical reports, again, for analysts usually. Here, data exploration a lot more. These are the mechanic looking at your car. They run the tests. They need to do different tests. They need to look at different things to see the issue, to see the underlying issue as well. Not just what the problem is, but if there's a leak in my car, what caused it, right? And then what happens next? Make sure that this won't happen again. Operational reports here. This says provides real-time data. I don't think it necessarily has to, but this is, again, things like the inventory, stock levels, think of I'm on a factory line, that sort of reports. To be honest, this is probably one of the ones I do the least in Power BI, but still a lot of people probably do, and a lot of different areas might. Educational reports, again, this is not so common, especially in a business setting. A big one of this, the big example I was kind of those COVID dashboards, right? Telling really important information, being able to show detail out to the public, essentially, not looking at business process or anything, but informing people and telling people important information to large audiences. Then, report type. This is now my one as well. This isn't kind of a Microsoft one, but this is the third question that I asked that I kind of added on to the other two, I think, to complete the context. And I say, what's your sort of report type? Again, this might map a bit one-to-one, but not necessarily. I normally go through 3. And this is one where maybe you might want to add your own. This could be specific. You might have kind of business specific use cases here. But generally, I find report types often fit into one of these 3 sections. Call it a structured top-down. And this is one of the most common types of reports that I do. Follows a story, and we'll probably focus a lot on this during these sessions. So you start from a high level, right? Such as the main KPI number. And then you go down into detail. And we'll show a couple of examples of this. And it says pages have few exits. We'll see what that means in the next couple of slides. But essentially, you're more or less guided through the report. Right? Here are my total sales, and here's my headline figures. My next page, I look at the trends and what's causing those figures. Then I look at more detailed breakdown. Right? Start at the biggest number, then down to the most detail. Very logical way to lay out reports. Goal-based outcome. This is probably more aligned often to those operational style reports. But these are when you're answering a specific question. A good thing of this is I often think of when some reports we might have built, and sometimes these have shelf life of shorter time, but to answer specific questions. Say we have an objective, right? I want to improve sales by 15% by the year or by Q2 of next year. Maybe a smart-based goal. Everything then, these are generally a lot more focused, right? They might have an end time. They might go around and are aligned to that goal, very focused on that.
No, I'll add a point in here. I really like these different types of reporting elements here. If you think about some of the 2 reports that I think resonate very well with a lot of things that I work through is I think I try and drive a lot of companies working towards goal-based outcomes, right? We have data, which data is great in and of itself, but if it doesn't have an expectation with it, what is the expected delivery or bar or threshold? We're trying to grow the business by 5% by the end of this year. There's usually numbers that are trying to align a direction of the company with what the data is showing. So I feel like a lot of the reports that I build is around goal-based outcomes. The analysis exploration or an exploratory report is also a very interesting way of building a report. These tend to be a lot more visuals, a lot of things on the page. And the idea is I'm not trying to cater a story for you, but they're also from a training or educational standpoint of the users consuming the report. We typically want the analysts who are using these kind of reports to be very well equipped to understand how to use PowerBI.com. Do I use all the navigation fields? Am I using personalized bookmarks inside the service? There's actually a little bit more intentionality as us as leaders in the Power BI organization. We want to make sure we educate our teams such that when we give an analysis or an exploratory report to somebody, they're able to go in and effectively dive through the information and not get distracted in the weeds by certain things, which data's fun. We will all get distracted. There's probably bunny trails all over the place. But the idea here is we want to make sure that the users have the best knowledge of the Power BI tool because this is a new experience for them. They haven't really maybe done a lot of work inside PowerBI.com. Other users who have had a lot more experience and time, they may not need as much help going through and how to use the report in an analysis way.
Yeah, precisely. And that's, I think, I very much agree. And typically these bottom two, I think, when you ask, especially companies, they're new, they're starting out or less experienced Power BI, you don't get these asks as much. Mike says, obviously, the second point, this is what you push people to. And this is probably a lot more useful, right?
Yes, I would agree.
Aligning your reports to goals and
Yes.
having some sort of action.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, when they think reports, they just say, I have this data, show me these graphs. This is how I want it laid out. No real intention behind it. I like that, the intention and the action, right? And no goal, no direction. So yeah, really, really, really like if you can get people towards these goal-based outcome. All right. So this is kind of the summary here, and of the few here. First, we'll look at the audiences, then the style and the type. And these come right through talking, through interviews. Not normally surveys or anything, but generally you want to take away the initial meetings. You want to go and get this sort of style of information. Baseline, right? This is before we start talking about what goes in the report. Maybe there's a bit of that, but obviously this is our number one. This is really what we have to think about first before we start thinking about designing the reports. Having this set out initially and everyone aware, and take this to meetings whenever you talk about these reports and say, this is what this is. It lays out a very good way to focus those meetings, and everyone's aligned, right? We know who's the audience of this. We know what sort of report we're looking at. It may change, right? And then we may adjust, and we might, often what happens is we start with one thought and then we actually split them up into multiple reports. Sometimes we split them too much and they combine. Iterative process, but having this well-defined and trying to get this set out as soon as possible, right? And having this laid out, very, very useful. Okay, the next thing, that kind of kickoff meeting, and this might be the kickoff meeting or the second meeting, say the kickoff directly. I'm going to take you through my actual tool I use to do this. So I use Miro. Here, I'm using my personal Miro here. You can have three free boards. So if you're a small individual or this is just my personal account, right? You can have it. It's a free tool. You can use 3 and it's great. If you have more than 3, you just delete or it just inactivates. It doesn't actually delete it, inactivates the last one. Really great tool. This has replaced, I think, war room post-it notes. What I mean that is when we all take post-it notes and put things on tables and walls. Now, kind of in this virtual world, we really like using tools like Miro. So what I usually do is this is my initial board, and I will take this. And to use Miro, I'm not going to, this isn't a demo of Miro, but we can just click and drag in kind of post-it notes like this, and we can build post-it notes. Very easy. Going to be a couple of quick tutorials if you've never used Miro. But essentially, this is the idea of Miro. So what I would do is and I like, you can zoom in, zoom out, kind of this stuff. I would look at this first thing. And this is kind of, we've talked about having the main audience, what we think this report is. What we want to start now doing is start talking about KPIs. KPIs, I kind of reference as these are the high level metrics that you're going to be viewing in your report. So for example, sales, right? That's a high level metric. This year sales, last year sales over year over year sales. That's all sales. That's on sales, right? Total profit, same thing. Year over year profit, last year profit. That's all just different filters on total profit. So kind of thinking of high level, brainstorming, and we just talk and we throw out the KPIs. Once we do this, the next section after we brainstormed and talked through, we have these and we kind of start grouping them, right? A lot of times, a lot of people have similar metrics. Depending on maybe your finance, then your metrics are probably well defined. So you might know, there's only a certain amount. Other times we might be inventing some, or we might have new ones, or we might be looking. So very much depending on what you're building, but generally you start grouping stuff and putting things together here. Once we've got a nice layout of what we think the KPIs are, the main sort of KPIs that we want, we group them. The next is really breakdowns. We start thinking about filters and kind of the targets that we want to see. This might go into a bit of modeling, which we're not going to cover here, but now we're sort of thinking of, what are those dimension tables that we're looking at? What are the data? What's the key parts of information, right? And that's going to differ by audiences, by your use types, and by your report styles. So once we've thought about the KPIs, then I'll typically go into this section, and hopefully we've kind of got an idea of the audience. This is normally, though, where I'd make a bit more of personas. So maybe executives, you might have a couple of personas in the executives. The personas just sometimes, if you want, you can make fictional people which represent, a representation of a group of people. So I might make, Anna the analyst, who is a representative of these type of analysts who have these sort of similar features. I'm using this to find insights. Then I might have, Bill, the data guy, who's using it to specifically help him with reporting and other projects. Not real people, but they're just a summarization of groups of personas of people. Once we have these, we kind of say how they're using it. I often do it this way, where I'll have my primary, and there's normally some secondary users, and it's a good way to split this, because a lot of times when you ask and you have these conversations, this gets really, really long. And kind of having this primary and secondary thought, we kind of focus on these primary users. This is who we're building it for, essentially. Always going to be secondary users. If you say, who's this useful for? I mean, it's probably useful for everyone in the company because it's good data and it's nice and it will look good. So you really want to keep your key audience here. And this is a good way of really drilling them down and really thinking about how they're going to be using it. And this is going to start going into the next sections when we're designing our pages.
So Steve, what kind of things would you find here? Would this be, things that I find when I'm talking through these different audiences, right? I'm an executive. I'm trying to use this report. Things that I would communicate to someone doing this work would be, I'm an executive. I want to spend 5 minutes in the morning looking at one page, maybe 2 pages at the most. I don't want to drill through. I want to focus on seeing what I need to do or take action on right now. And I have expectations of my business. I want to see how we're trending towards those expectations. Are those the kind of features you would try to capture on this page?
Yeah, definitely. And we definitely want those. And we drill down to this a bit more later in the process. So that's exactly where we're going.
Sure.
As we'll see later, as you say, this is exactly those conversations. And we'll have more and more of those and really define them. But I love that. And I often use as a I want to. So
yes.
that kind of that language, right? So as an executive, I want to spend 5 minutes in the morning viewing this report so that and the action I want to take from it.
Yes. I think this is very helpful. When you do this activity, you'll find that this pattern is not very unique. There's not a lot of these. There's actually a very few amount of use cases here. So you'll quickly, as you do more of these, I feel like there's not a wide array of audiences or applications you're trying to build here around these users. You'll find this to be very repeatable. And then as you get good at this, and as you do this with more teams, you'll find that you're going to hear those patterns over and over again. And so at some point, for organizations, especially if you're using a wonderful tool like Miro, we use it as well in our company. But the idea is you may actually have on the side of your page, here are some of the standard personas we have, right? So again, thinking through how do I optimize and build this in a repeatable way. Once you've gotten through a couple of these teams, some teams in your organization will know very clearly what they want to do with the report and how they want to use it. Other teams really don't know yet, and you're going to have to help guide them a little bit. So there's a little bit of education you may be doing inside your team, and that's why we really like this process, because this really does facilitate the conversation. It brings people along for the ride, and what this is doing is basically closing the gap between what you can build as the report builder and what they can expect as a report consumer or a person interacting with Power BI. And so what we're doing here is this is a methodology to continue to close that gap. So that way, when we're done building a report, you're happy with what we've produced.
Yeah, exactly. And, when you said there'll be some groups which would be good at this, and typically I would say a lot of your end users or people you're interviewing will struggle with this and probably wouldn't have thought
Yes.
of this sort of way of thinking before. Generally, when you're doing this, it's going to be something that you will, as you said, learn. It does take practice. That's why having a framework like this does really help.
Yes.
I would say build this before you go into the meeting, right?
Agreed.
Turn up with this, have a list of questions you're going to answer. It will get easier the more and more you do it. You will find you do have to lead and you have to kind of extract this information out of your end users, because they're not always going to be in this mind frame, right? And they're not going to be knowing exactly what this means. But it is very, very important if you want to get really good reports that are useful and used for a long time.
Yep.
So once we kind of define this audience, and again, we probably define the audience, but this is really drilling down into the audience and starting to see how they use it. As I say, we'll iterate on this as we go through the process and probably refine this a lot more. It's very good to try and get as much detail, as Mike said, really why they're using it and the actions. And typically, I will have some sort of output like this. We report the name and the type, and I put the type and style here normally. I will also create from this a report story, and I love report stories. A 2 to 3 sentence, maybe less, maybe 2 is great, description of the report's purpose and goals and why you're building it, what business value it's going to have to the business. Very simple. It's basically a summary, of all this information here in a couple of sentences. If you try to summarize everything in a sentence or two, nail down that business value. This gives your story, your report, a really good focus, and it's a really difficult thing to summarize in a couple of sentences, but really powerful when you can. Awesome. So that'll be kind of that kickoff meeting. That it might not be the initial meeting, but it's kind of part of those maybe group of kickoff meetings where you've defined the audience and you've talked through. So, as I said, we kind of pick this. We'll say, hey, these are then. We'll highlight exactly what we want. I'll probably produce something like this. So this is my audience. This is my style. This is my type. I will then have exactly the other thing and that report story and those outputs. So these will be the outputs of this requirements gathering session. Knowing who we're building it for, knowing the type of and style of reporting, starting to think on how they would use it, and having that overview of that report story. So the second half of this, the design flow map, is actually building the design flow map itself. So what is the design flow map? This is now where we take our Miro. And I said this is a kickoff meeting. Normally, this probably takes a few meetings. It might be with a few different stakeholders. It might be over a little bit of time. You might need to iterate on it a lot. But eventually, you're going to start building these KPIs. What I will start then doing is, now that we've grouped these KPIs, we know sort of what the main the views are and what we're trying to see and who's trying to use it. We start thinking about the pages. I actually start a bit backwards. So this is an iterative process between this and the next step. I normally start at this, which is probably the end step, but I find it a lot easier to think of it this way. What I would normally do is I would start thinking logically on, okay, let's start arranging into pages into different sections on how we lay this out. And this really reflects on your style and your report. So for example, if you're thinking of it's top down where you start at the high level, I think, okay, I know I'm going to probably have a front page, the initial page where I go, and it's going to have these high level KPIs on it. Goal-based reporting, right? And you think, okay, where logically are we going to start? I need to guide these through. And then you start laying out this page. When I'll do that, I'll probably I'll say, okay, obviously every report is going to have an initial starting page. I just give it a name, and these often change, but it could be page 1 for now or front page. But we'll give it a name as we go. I normally answer these few questions on the page itself. So I think kind of what type of page it is. I like to keep it simple, and I just call it, is this a main page? What I mean by main page is this one of the initial pages, depending on your navigation. So we'll look at that a bit later, but this is going to be a page that I'm directly navigating to. It could be the front page, or it could be, page 2 or 3 in my navigation. Secondary pages, very similar to main pages, except I don't expect you to start on this page. So this could be, the trends, for example. My main page might be my high-level KPIs. Secondary page is still a page I can navigate to, but usually I've gone through another page first, and it's probably a bit more detailed or different sort of information. Helper pages as well. We love, do you need training pages? Do you need splash pages? Do you need sort of DevOps pages? Anything like that? Make sure you include them so you don't forget and miss them out of your report. And a drill through page, right? Is it a drill through page? Is this only accessible via drill through? And that it is a drill through page, right? It has a very different context. Obviously, you could add more. You could add tooltips and that kind of stuff. I like to just think of tooltips not as pages, but as kind of extensions. So as you will, I normally add them a bit later in my thinking. KPIs, right? Then you're this is where you've done your KPI grouping. Now we're starting to think, okay, I'm thinking on my main page here. This is my overview page. I want to show my main sort of 3 KPIs. I said keep to under 5, right? I think 5 even would be a lot. So on that one page, you probably want to keep it as minimal KPIs per page as you can. Maybe a goal-based report. You might have different reports for a different couple of groups of KPIs. Right? We might have this kind of sales and profit, and then the next one might be cost of goods or something. So really thinking on what KPIs we want. Again, notice this is all words, and this is all very high-level theoretical, and the idea is we iterate through, and it becomes easier and easier. The first time through this might change a lot from what you actually end up putting on the report, and that's fine. But the idea is you go through, and as we go through the framework, the second time as we kind of iterate around, it'll get a lot easier to put this out. Outline, very similar to a report story, but you should have a reason for this page being there. The reason isn't just because I have some data and I want to put it, and I just want to make graphs because I have the data. Why is this page there? What action is this page driving, right? Why is this a separate page on your report? Then entry and exit. And I think these are really important for pages. It tells you how someone's going to enter this page. For the main page, obviously, if this is front page, well, this is the first, my entry will be opening the report, right? I'm going to open the report, and this is the first page I'm going to land on. For a drill through page, that's going to be very different because I'm only entering this page via drilling through another visual. And I don't want to just say via drilling through another visual. I want to talk about the context. So a user's seen an interesting value in another page and is entering this page to see more. And this is where you design your drill throughs to be a bit more specific, right? Maybe this is for something, this is not going to be off target. You're going to see, you're going to see off target values because of the nature of your data. That's how they're going to be entering this page. If it's a secondary page, right? So maybe they viewed the high level metrics. Now they're entering this page after viewing the high level metrics in order to see a bit more detail about those specific metrics. So really, what context are they entering that page? Because that's going to help you lay out the page, and you know the context and why they're coming here. That's going to help to understand what they want to see on your page. And then exit, same thing. You're not always going to know, obviously. There's going to be a lot of different exits, but what are the main thing that viewers will go next, right? What's going to be their next kind of questions? Again, this might be a bit of persona based, and it might be a lot of different things, but you want to think of, hey, I know this main page. I've seen my main KPIs. Their next move logically is probably to go to a trends page. Well, I'm on the trends page. Their next move is probably either going to be drill down to more detail or look at a breakdown page, something like that. So knowing how they're going to leave the page and what you think they're going to go to next. Then what I think I like to do is essentially build a map like this. So this is my design flow map. What I will normally do, and you can see here, it comes through well on the screen. They're very slightly kind of shaded differently. So I've got my main page is this dark gray, my secondary page, I've got a drill through, supplementary or helper, same thing. I typically use supplementary pages because they might just be information on anything else which isn't necessarily a page. So it could be a how-to page. I also mark the entries and exits, right? So I've already written kind of my page purpose and what the page and the main KPIs on my other sheet. And I will do that for each page. So here I've got 6 pages. I will have one of these sheets for each of those 6 pages. And this is where this is quite an iterative process, right? And you'll probably go back and forth. I like to actually start on this page and on this section. I actually think this is easier. Logically, this is probably the second one, right? So a lot of people probably want to start here on the map, put out the pages and then describe it. It's more, there's no real place to start. It's probably a start together, right? An iterative process. With that, I also want to link out kind of the exits, right? Obviously up here, the entry will be, you just navigate to it. Where do we think we're going to go to next? And these drill down pages, where they're accessible from. I've done things such as weighting these lines, right? Think of the most common, or maybe color coding them, the most common entry and exits that will go to where we're going to go to next. Really help lay this out. Obviously, we'll give these pages names, not just call them all page name, but we'll have everything here. This is our start now of our design. I will say this isn't set in stone. So nothing you do here is set in stone. Often from this, we go back, and I might have, depending on the size of the project, I might then have another meeting where we revisit the Miro board. Something I'm very keen on is getting a lot of feedback early and as soon as possible. So I'll probably go back to my stakeholder after I've designed this and say, hey, this is how I think the report's going to look. Just obviously no visuals or anything yet. This is what I think the report will look like. And here's some data. I might even summarize this and not give them all 7 sheets. Say, hey, this is what each page is going to view. You can probably put this on one piece of paper. What do you think, right? Go back. If it's a really big project, I might then go back to the Miro board, go back through the teams and we'll talk together, get some more information about the pages and say, have I missed anything? Have I misunderstood in our requirements gathering session? That will happen very often. It's hard to get requirements. It's a hard thing to ask and to take requirements. It's also difficult because people are, to be honest, notoriously bad at giving requirements. They don't really know what they want. And that's one of the biggest problems with designing something like this. So with that, I think that ends the first session in the design flow map. The next kind of sessions we're going to go through, we're going to look at how to do the wireframes and the visual designs tomorrow. And then finally, we're going to look at looking at some tools and different ways we can actually turn our wireframes into reality.
So one thing I'd like to note here as well is this design flow map is a very powerful tool It also helps people understand expectations as to what they're going to be doing in a report or not doing the report. There's also exit points here. Again, when we design, you're doing embedded scenarios, if you're building more of an application around the Power BI visuals themselves, there's also other exits out of your report. Maybe I want to export to Excel, and then we continue the experience somewhere else. We may want to give people some pages, and then Steve, you did a presentation a long time ago when we were still doing user groups in Milwaukee, but you actually had the idea of taking an Excel sheet and pre-connecting an Excel sheet directly to a data model, and then providing a link to go download the Excel sheet to the user. So the idea is the data model is so important here. And what this is helping us design as a report designer, it's giving us a little bit of a lens into what does our data model do and how do we expect people to work or operate within this report. And this is where we look at, in our process, where is the most friction? Do people know how to go do analyze in Excel? Do we need to give them a Power BI Excel report that already has linkages, tables, pre-built information already inside the Excel sheet? We can do that now. And so this experience here really talks about a lot of other things. And as Power BI, and I anticipate here, as Power BI is continually to grow, we have things like data marts and SQL tables and writing SQL statements. So depending on who your user audience is, there's potential links to other parts of the Power BI ecosystem in PowerBI.com. Maybe it's a paginated report. There could be other data points here that are going to take you out and help you elaborate on this user journey. So we think this is a really good technique to be able to use this language around the flow of how users are running and moving around inside the reports. So great example here, Steve. Really like this one. With that, we will then kind of wrap it up here. Thank you very much for our first session on. There's 2 more sessions of this coming along. They will be scheduled later this week. So I think their second one is on Friday.
Yep.
And then we have another one coming up next Wednesday as well. So those will get scheduled. Stay tuned. Watch the Power BI Tips channel. If you like this session and you want to be notified about the next 2 sessions coming up, please subscribe and hit the little bell. That will also let you notify you on when we get to our next session. With that, Steve, great presentation. I really like this content. This is something that resonates very well with me. I use this stuff all the time, or things that are very similar in nature. So I really appreciate you sharing this. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Yes, thank you very much, and see everyone in the next session.